I've never made a mistake. I thought I did once, but I was wrong. Now that's an old funny joke, and it's funny because nobody would actually speak like that and mean it. And if anybody did mean it, they're either delusional or they really think that they're better than everybody else, that they're perfect. My mom would say to people, by the way, if you're perfect, nobody would like you anyway. Do you have to be perfect with God? Do you have to have everything set in line for Him to like you? And just because you have a few imperfections, is that okay? Does He just let those go? Will He take you anyway? In the Gospel from Luke chapter 18, there's a man who came to Jesus asking for his eternal inheritance. He wanted heaven. He wanted to know that he would be with Jesus in heaven after he died. Now Jesus explained to him, well, you remember the commandments, and the ones especially that deal with love for your neighbor. And he did. He recalled them, and he says, well, all these I've kept since I was a boy. But was that enough? Jesus pointed out to him, but you still lack one thing. And because he was a rich ruler, he had great wealth, and Jesus says, go sell everything you have, give to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. It's interesting that Jesus did that. Sometimes we're afraid to point out to others the one thing that's lacking, even if it is just one thing. That we'll be more allowing and tolerant and accepting of people and supportive of their life and of their choices just because we don't want to point it out. Let's assume that that rich ruler had only one thing wrong with him, and Jesus pointed it out. He loved him enough to show him what he was lacking. It would have been unloving for him to just let him continue on thinking he might have eternal life when he's living in sin. Now this man walked away sad because he had great wealth. He walked away from Jesus, the only source of salvation. He could have gone to Jesus. He could have stayed with Jesus. He could have taken his advice and his counsel and corrected his life and his heart, but he didn't. He walked away from Jesus. That's the saddest part of that account with that rich ruler, was that he walked away from Jesus. Your greatest place is to be right there with Jesus, where you can know that with all things possible with God. Jesus made that point for the rich man, and as he was walking away and the crowd was asking, well, who then can be saved? If this guy, who's got most of his life put together, can't be saved because he's still lacking one thing, what about me? Well, Jesus says, with man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Eternal salvation, having an inheritance in heaven, is possible because Jesus made it possible. Jesus kept the commandments, and when he kept them, they counted for something. Now, when the rich man did all of that, had that obedient life, it didn't count for anything because of the one thing he lacked. The one thing made everything else worthless. But because Jesus was perfect, there is eternal salvation for not just for himself, but for everyone. It counts. It counts for you. It counts for me. It counted for that rich ruler who was there before Jesus. It counted for him even after he walked away. As Jesus looked longingly after him in love, still wanting him to be there and follow with him, Jesus knew that he was keeping the commandments. He was keeping the law in that man's place. And Jesus would suffer and die on the cross for that man, and he would do that for you too. Don't walk away from Jesus. Not when he is your source of an eternal inheritance. With God, all things are possible. Your eternal salvation is possible through Christ. And yes, if there is even just one thing lacking, that too is possible for Jesus to come and fix in your life. Later on in Luke chapter 19 was a man named Zacchaeus. Read about that. How Jesus came into his house and he filled up the one thing he was lacking, and his life turned around. It was a life-altering, life-changing experience. Jesus preached the gospel to him, and his life changed. May the gospel you hear today, and every day that you are in the Word, be a life-changing experience for you. May you trust and know that with God all things are possible. Thanks for listening. This has been Pastor Nate Fager. May God bless your day.